What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 529 of Get Paid for Your Pad. Today, we are going to talk about 3 steps to increase your Airbnb revenue 15 to 30%. Everybody wants to increase their revenue, so pay attention. We're going to share some cool strategies here. So I invited the revenue management expert in our short-term rental space, Mr. John N. We've been friends for a while. John, you've been part of our mastermind. Like we go back a couple of years, and yeah, I'm excited to chat to you about this. I think you came up with a really good pricing strategy, so I'm excited to dive into it. John, welcome back to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, Jasper. I think we met in Cartagena, right? In 2019 or 2020, actually. And yeah, so it's really good to be back on the show. And I'd love to talk to you about revenue management and how basically an approach that people can take to really, I think, increase their revenue. So
Yeah,
let's do it.
yeah, for sure, man. We were talking before we started recording, and I think we are very on the same page as what we think is the best strategy to maximize revenue for Airbnb listings. So I'm excited to dive into it. Last time we spoke on the podcast, we were talking about how to select your property management system. So if you're listening to this, you might know John from that episode. But yeah, let's get into it. And before we dive into it, how did you become? Because you're kind of like one of the revenue management experts in the short-term rental space now. Like, how did you become to be that expert?
I think basically I fell into the short-term rental industry like a lot of other people. And from day one, I actually was playing with a lot of the technology, a lot of the systems, and essentially rolling up my sleeves and really focusing in, detail on each and every property that I brought on for my own management purposes. And so I did not go to revenue management school. I did not, I don't have any specific training. But what initially, obviously, a lot of it was trial and error. But every time I met industry experts, large operators, industry knowledge leaders, thought leaders, and I would kind of explain what my properties, the type of revenue that I was generating, and across the board, people were just saying, "Wow, like that's it was like 2 bedroom, 2 bath condos, and not in Honolulu, but on average, are grossing around $225,000 per year on a condo." And so, it kind of piqued a lot of people's interest. And that's when I kind of thought, like, I must be doing something right that, across the board, people are impressed. And so I started essentially documenting, like, what am I doing? What am I looking at? What are the triggers that I'm looking at? And started doing that, one by one. And so over the years, I've kind of collected experience and knowledge and built out a system that now I'm able to provide this service not only for my own properties, but for other property managers.
Awesome, dude. Yeah, well, let's give us a quick background. You mentioned Honolulu. You have 2 bedroom condos there. Give us a quick background of, like, how many units you're managing and what your what's your niche.
Right. So in terms of the full management, my management company, I'm focused in Honolulu, in Hawaii. My bread and butter properties are 2 bedroom, 2 bath condominiums in resort areas in Waikiki. And for those properties, again, generate somewhere around $200,000 to $225,000 per year gross. I'm managing 10 properties now. So a very small portfolio in terms of full management. On the other hand, with my revenue management and with TechTape, which is my technology service company, I have, I think, around 110 properties that I'm providing either revenue management or some sort of technology service for.
Sure. Awesome. All right, man. Well, let's dive into the strategy here. Give us a background of, like, what the I know there's like 3 steps that we're gonna go through, but on a high level, like, what's what's the thought process behind this revenue management strategy? And can you give a background of like what, like how most hosts are doing revenue management, and how you think there's a better way, essentially?
Yeah. I'll just start off by saying, what I'm doing, anyone can kind of follow this along. So it's not some secret sauce, some magic, black box thing that I'm doing in the background. I think it's just kind of a perspective on how to use the data and the tools that are out there and available. And so I guess the background that I'll start off with is there's kind of a tendency, there's a lot of data in our industry. And so, you keep hearing people saying, oh, my business is data driven, data driven. And what that kind of implies is that the data will tell me what the right answer is. And so I just can kind of trust the data to do it. And so in some industries, that makes a lot of sense because kind of the data set is kind of validated. And we can get into this a little bit. But in the short-term rental industry, one of the issues that I think with the data is right. I'm not saying the data is wrong. But because every property is unique and the vast majority of the industry is set up by mom and pops, by individuals who are running their own, properties, there's no kind of set rule by which everyone is playing. And so what the data is telling you is just the average of everyone just guessing at what the price should be. And so trying to use the data to pinpoint exactly what price you should be at or what occupancy you should be at is really taking a lot of random noise that's been aggregated and then trying to make business decisions around that. And so that's kind of the first part of the concept that for me, the data is very important to my business and to my revenue management, but I'm not looking at specific data points, specific numbers. What I'm really looking at are overall trends that the data is telling me, are things picking up? Are things slowing down? And by looking at that kind of average data, not the specific, then you can get signals in your market and kind of understand what to do with that data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And just kind of explain this in a way that everybody, I think, will understand it. Is, there's kind of like two ways. Well, first of all, like like I feel like most people, most professional hosts at this point are using a pricing app, right? And there's a bunch of them out there, right? There's the main ones, that Price Labs, Beyond, Wheelhouse, and I think now there's a bunch of other ones. But most hosts have stepped away from just kind of manually putting in like what, even like having just one price. Like I remember when I got started, I looked at other Airbnb listings. So it's like, oh, everyone's just charging one price for every single day of the year, but I think most hosts have stepped away from that. We're using now a pricing app, which is good. But the challenge is, with the pricing app, you still have to tell the pricing app how to price, right? You have to set a strategy inside of the pricing app. And that's what I see a lot of hosts struggle with. They'll sign up for a pricing app but then they don't know like, well, how to set the parameters. Right. And I feel like there's two ways of doing it. There's number one is kind of, you have the base price, and then you have the variation around the base price based on your season, based on your day of the week, based on if there's something special happening in your market. So it's like you have the base price and you have the variation around the base price. And the big question is, how do you come up with that base price? Right. And there's kind of two ways of doing it. You could either say, hey, let's look at what other similar units in my market are doing, right? Or you can set it based on pacing, which we'll go into, because that's what your strategy is all about, pacing, right? But to give a very simple example from when I started back in the day in 2012 in Amsterdam, I looked at other units that were similar to my apartment, and I noticed they're all priced at around 150. So then I thought, well, that means that mine should be priced around 152, right? But then what happened was I got booked out like 3 months in advance, like very, very quickly. And and I recognized, I was like, hey, if I'm getting booked so fast like that, I could probably charge a higher price, right? So I started raising my price, and at some point I was charging like 300, like 350 a night, and I was looking at all the units. I was like, holy cow. I
Mhm.
almost felt bad charging that much. I was like, this is a lot of money for like small apartment. But I was like, hey, people are paying it. People are happy getting 5-star reviews. Like, so I started like looking more of like, hey, I know, roughly 30 days out, I should be around 50% booked. And then like, 60, 90 days out, I should be about like maybe 30 or 20%. I started just setting my prices based on that. So that's kind of like the two models. And I'm curious to hear from you if this is accurate what I'm saying. But you can either you look at what other units are doing, or you look at, and that's kind of like data based, I guess, or you just look at like, hey, how many bookings do I have, and how many bookings am I supposed to have this far out in the future. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. You're exactly right. And I think it's a combination of the two, right? So one, if you're just going into a market that you know nothing about, at least the data, what your neighbors are doing kind of gives you some clue as to, what the range and parameters and kind of the starting point should be. And so, you know, like I do revenue management around the world, and I have not been doing that, all around. So that's one data point to use. What the market, similar properties are priced at. And then the other data point is, whomever the manager or the owner is, because they know their market too, since they've been in it. So that's kind of how you start off, right? But then at the end of the day, the second part of what you said, it's really finding what the market will bear. And I think a lot of people come in and say, hey, this is a 1 bedroom with a beautiful view. I updated it, so it's really nice. So it should be, and then they put a number, a low number and a high number and an average number. And then they play within that like bounds that they have set in their own minds for whatever reason. And the thing is, the people who are looking to book, they find value in different things. And so some people might value it more, some people might value it less. And so that second approach that you're saying of like looking at occupancy, like that's how you start settling into your overall pricing strategy. And the other thing that I want to say is even within the same, neighborhood, if you have two, similar houses, 3 bedroom, 2 bath house, every property, both physical, the physical characteristics as well as online characteristics are different. So even if they're in one, houses right next to each other, one might be closer to a busier street, or one might have a better view, right? Slightly, and that could be the differentiator. Or one house might have a 4-star review, but has a hot tub, right? The other house does not have a hot tub, but has a 4.7-star review, and that can make the difference. And so you really can't I know there are people who do it, and they're much smarter than I am, and that's how they figured it out. But I don't think, for me, I cannot figure out by having this one feature, it means it's a 10% increase in you know, in how much someone's willing to pay. It's at the end of the day, it's the overall, all the components of the listing and the property and the review that then people who are looking to book are saying, hey, I'm willing to pay this much for this property. And that's really it's that point that you're trying to find. If you're too high, no one's going to book. If you're too low, people are going to book way too fast. And so you're trying to find that, but not only in like the 1 month out, but the 2 months out and the 3 months out and the 6 months out. And that's the kind of what we're always trying to find as we're
Yeah.
doing revenue management.
Right. And that's what we call the demand curve,
Yep,
right? It
exactly.
basically means like, hey, for your and that demand curve varies from market to market, but even from property to property, as you um as you mentioned. Or should we be looking, or is the demand curve roughly the same, you think, for maybe for each neighborhood or a type of listing in the market?
I think the demand curve overall is pretty similar in the market. So I don't think, like similar properties in a market, the demand curve should be approximately similar. So I think that's where, when I was saying you're looking at trends and not at specific data points, what that overall market is doing is a pretty good sign of, hey, there's a pickup in this market. Okay, so now let's find what people are willing to purchase. At the same time, if you see the demand curve going down, you can get out ahead of it and not respond after having an empty calendar for 2 weeks, but get out ahead of it to get people to book before the slowdown happens.
Right. So when we look at data, it's not so much like the price points at what other units are getting booked at. Is more like the pace at which units are getting booked. So how far out in advance are people booking right now in the marketplace? That's a more important data point then, right?
That's one of the key points that I look at to get the signals, aside from the signals that Beyond Pricing or Wheelhouse or Price Labs provides. It is frequency of people booking or inquiring within your market as a broad sense.
Got it. So let's so you developed this 3-step approach, right? That people can, who are listening, can implement, and they can use it to increase their Airbnb revenue 15 to 30%. That's based on what you've seen, with the properties that you've used this strategy for. Of course, there's no guarantee, but yeah, dive into the strategy. What's the first step in that?
Yeah. Let me add one more factor to consider, and then I'll get right to it.
Sure.
The other thing is different people have different risk tolerance, right? And the data is not going to tell you what your risk tolerance is. And so some people lose sleep if they're not, 2-3 months booked solid because they think they're going to lose money. Other people lose sleep if it's too booked because they think they've already lost money, right? And because of that, what you're trying to find what the market will bear, it also has to factor in what is your risk tolerance in terms of your pricing and your investment thesis. And so that's another part that we need to work with other people, the owner, the manager, to understand what's your risk tolerance, and then base the strategy around that. So the reason why I added that is an integral part of this, the process. So
yeah, that's very good
in a
point.
high level outline, the 3-step process that we have is, first, understanding the pacing in the market, as you just explained. So, how fast are different time periods in your market? How fast is that booking up, right? And so the activity within that market kind of shows you, if there's a lot of bookings going on, that there's kind of a high demand period coming up, and you can respond around that. So that understanding pacing, number one. Then out of that, this is where kind of your risk tolerance kind of aligns with this the step. You need to kind of establish what is the overall occupancy profile that you're looking at over time, right? And you mentioned this, Jasper, before. Within the last 30 days, there's kind of a occupancy target that you're striving for. Within 60 days out, there's another. Within I don't know, 6 months out, there's another. And so there's kind of an occupancy curve that you ideally want to hit. And so that's where kind of your risk tolerance and pricing strategies align. I'm working with this one client who loves playing last man standing. And so his risk tolerance is so high, it actually makes me nervous, because I'm like, it's still empty. He's like, don't worry, like, I want to play last man standing, right? In that case, he's not phased if he's at 50% occupancy 2 weeks out, because he feels confident that people are going to come in and book, right? So the occupancy profile is where you're aligning your risk tolerance with your pricing strategy, right? And so monitoring on that, then the third step is what you're doing is you're adjusting the price, the nightly rate as the lever to achieve that occupancy profile that you're trying to trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Right. So very simple. It's not rocket science, but it does take constant monitoring. It's kind of like the way I think of it is Tesla has full self-drive, right? And the idea is the car knows what it's supposed to do. Legally you have to keep your hands on the wheel, but really you don't need to. The reality is you do need to keep your hands on the wheel because the car doesn't always do the right thing. It's similar with revenue management. This 3-step process is fairly straightforward, but the algorithm, I have not found that the algorithm can execute on it, just based on rules and based on the data. And so that's where, I guess a revenue management service, whether myself or, some other service provider, that's the hands on the wheel of like making sure that, it's going in the direction that you want it to go.
Yeah. So the 3-step approach is, number one is like, you gotta understand what's the pacing for your unit, right? Are people booking? What percentage of occupancy should you be at any point in time, right? And that pace, we'll dive into like how we can calculate that. But then it's like the second step: establish your target occupancy, kind of based on your risk profile, right? Some people, like you mentioned, some people don't mind giving up a little bit of profit or revenue to have less variation, right? So they're like, hey, you know what? Like, if I know like I should be to maximize revenue, I should be 30% booked, but if I'm 40-50% booked, I'm cool with that because I have a bit more security that way. So, and then the third step is adjusting your base. If you're using a pricing app, that will be your base price, right? Adjusting your base price in your pricing tool to either increase it if you're behind the pacing curve or the demand curve, and decreasing it. Increasing if you're ahead, and decreasing if you're behind, right? But let's go a little bit more into these 3 steps. So first of all, the pacing. So, and we talked about a little bit about this, but so how do we do that research? Do we look at our own historic data, or do we look at the market data that we can pull from these pricing apps?
I would say market data. Historic data is meaningful, but as we all learned, during COVID, historic data, if something weird happens, is meaningless. And I believe in our industry right now, travel trends are shifting quite dramatically, unlike how, they have been for decades and decades. And so at this point, still, I think historic data is something to look at just to see what happened. But it's really the market data and looking forward, what you're looking at. And so all the pricing tools that that are out there, Wheelhouse, Price Labs, I believe Beyond as well, and Buoy, which is a newcomer in the dynamic pricing ecosystem. They have their version of providing what's going on in the market in terms of booking pace. That's how they get the profile of when they increase and decrease the prices. And so that's more market driven. Yes, if you have a big portfolio, you can look at your own portfolio to kind of see what's going on. But I think that step number one is really that's the market data component of what's going on overall in your market, and what are the events that are happening, or what are the factors that are influencing it. So step one is really kind of the high level market information that you're gathering.
Right. So then, like, what's the actionable step? Do we create a little Excel sheet or something where, we put down like, hey, 30 days out, my market is 40% booked, on that? Or
I think
how does that work?
so. For me,
What's the
it's
process?
number of bookings or number of inquiries, right? For pacing. It's a combination of the actual booked. So even if it's not booked, if there are a lot of inquiries around that date, then you kind of know, something is going on, right? Maybe your prices are still too high, but at least there's a lot of activity. And then in Wheelhouse or in Price Labs, there are some form of pacing report that that can show you, how many bookings there have been in the market, things of that nature. And so that is kind of a high level tool, data that I rely on data providers to provide. At the same time, within my portfolio, I could see, let's say I have a portfolio of 30 properties in one region. If, all of a sudden there are a whole bunch of bookings around a certain date, it's like, all right, there's something going on. And that's kind of, where you're pinpointing.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then the second step is like establishing a target of occupancy. Do you do specific time periods for that? Like, do you say like, hey, I'm looking at 30 days out, 60 days out, 90 days out? How does that work? How do you choose those time frames?
I think it's kind of our, we live by months. So uh either it's like bi-weekly or monthly kind of time frames, at least the way I look at it, right? So either 2-week time frames if it's very, very specific, or kind of monthly time frames. And that kind of gives you kind of a parameter. The way I looking at like big, trends is when you're driving, you're not looking 5 feet in front of you and like responding to everything that's right in front, right? You're looking, quarter of a mile out to kind of see the general direction that you want to be going, right? And so doing it on like a monthly basis allows you to have that kind of perspective. I have some clients who want weekly reports, and the weekly reports are actually really dangerous because that's like, literally like driving, looking 2 feet in front and like responding to everything that's in front of you. Yes, you might have 1 week where, there's a gap between, a couple bookings. And so it looks like your occupancy has dropped tremendously. But if you respond to that, then you're going to be, messing up your revenue management strategy. So generally, I think monthly is a pretty good time frame. If you have a low risk tolerance, probably quarterly. I've not worked with anyone who's looking at quarterly occupancy numbers, but that's kind of a way that you can look at it. But at that stage, you kind of want kind of bigger time chunks, so that you're seeing big overall trends. So I think monthly is a pretty good, pretty good time frame to look at.
So then we say, okay, 1 month out, I want to be 50% booked. 2 months out, I want to be 30% booked, and 3 months out, I want to be 15% booked, for example.
Yep,
right. And then what
exactly.
you do is you keep an eye on your data. Maybe once a month you review the data and say like, hey, has anything changed in my market? When are the bookings coming in? Maybe the bookings are shifting to more last minute, or maybe the bookings are shifting more further out. And then you can kind of adjust those target occupancies. Then the last, sorry, do you want to add to that?
No, the one thing I'll say is, you said, check in on it about, every month. And that's the part where I would say it's keeping the hands on the wheel. I think it's much more frequent than every month, so that you can make the adjustments as, as things are developing. So that's the one thing that I would say. But yes, overall, what exactly what you mentioned. And then so going on to the third step, you're gonna say.
Yeah. So adjusting the nightly rate. So my I guess my question, I guess I have two questions. Is number one is how quickly do we adjust? So let's say I'm like, I want to be 50% booked 30 days out, and 40% booked. Is that enough of a gap to change my prices, or should I wait till the gap is like 15%? And then number two, the second question, like how much do I adjust my price?
And that's where I think you actually just hit the nail on the head, right? With the hammer. That's where the kind of the soft factor comes in. That's where, with the algorithm and everything, that there are some, obviously, like, what's that range? Is 40% too much to make adjustments or not? It's a combination of those two that I think the intuition or the human factor or human touch comes in. And so, yes, there are ways to create rules that say, if it's more than 10% off, then discount it by this much and everything. But it's not, it hasn't been a hard and fast way that the algorithm can just fully do it. And so I can't give you a straight answer, because that's where, you make the adjustment and it still doesn't respond, then you take additional, measures to, try to make sure that you get the response that you want.
Right.
Does that make sense? So that's
Yeah.
where, again, that's keeping the hands on the wheel. You know what you want to see. You know generally what you want to do when things aren't happening the way they go. But then there are also kind of manual or, additional adjustments that need to be made to make sure that you're achieving those goals and those targets.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the X factor, right? It's like knowing,
That's
like,
how I
okay,
see it. Yeah.
how quickly do I adjust and by how much? That's kind of the, I always think of like pricing algorithms and revenue management as like, there's the computer, there's the algorithm, and there's the human skill set, right? Um, and it's like combining those two is where we can really optimize, right? It's like if you
Yep.
compare it to chess, it's like a human still beats the computer, even though the computer can calculate 1,000,
Not anymore,
10,000
actually, right?
moves. Really?
I think
Is it?
now the computer would beat humans all the time. So hopefully revenue management could get to that level someday.
I thought it was still like I thought it was still a human who was like the world champion versus the computer, but I might be wrong on that.
I think very recently it's shifted.
Ah,
But I think the reason why the human factor is there is also, again, it comes back to your risk factor, risk profile, right? So in that, fuzzy area, if you're more risk tolerant, then, you might wait longer or you might not make any adjustments. But if you're more risk averse, then you make more, drastic adjustments. And so, I'm not trying to say, oh, this is where the human factor comes in. And I have that human factor. And so that's why, that's not it. It's really because there are multiple factors and influences that determine, do you reduce it by 5%, 10%, 20%, right? And that kind of comes down to what are you comfortable with? And so that's where really, again, that's why I can't answer your question, but you can kind of say, all right, like, do I really want to fill this up and make sure I stay on target? Then you'll say, okay, I'm willing to, give up a little extra, potential extra earnings to try to make sure that I get that booking.
I got one last question on this. So let's say hypothetically, like I have a unit and I'm seeing that like I'm not getting booked at the pace that the market's getting booked at.
Mhm.
And so what I do is I lower my price a bit, and then I'm still not getting the pace that I'm looking for, so I'm lower a bit more. But at some point I'm like, hey, I don't want to go below this. This is kind of like my minimum price.
Yeah.
Like what's our play once we reach that point?
So like we discussed earlier on, there are lots of factors that go into what people are willing to pay in bulk, right? So if your market is really, booking at a certain pace and at a certain price, and you're not getting it, I would say either, your physical property, are there consistent problems that on the reviews show up that, I highlighting some issues with your property. You know, basically I would be looking at kind of your overall listing, overall property, new photos, and I would do kind of an audit of what is going on with the property overall, that people are not willing to book. Because again, this is exactly what you're saying. At the end of the day, the market will tell you if your property is desirable or not, right? And if you're 50% below what everybody else is getting, and still you're not getting bookings, there's got to be something about your pictures, your description, your reviews, that all those things are coming into play. I am not a SEO expert. I think there are other people who really look at every aspect of your listing, your amenities, and really pull that apart. And so, you might want to work with someone like that to really pinpoint what may be with the listing.
Yeah.
But yeah, yes, I'm not always just drop your price, just drop your price. That's not the answer to everything. But you have to look at the holistic picture, not just your revenue.
Yeah. And that's where like it becomes useful to look at the prices that similar listings in your market are getting booked at. Because like you said before, which I think is very true, it's like every listing is unique. Right. It could be like even changing the orders of some photos. It could be changing your title, or it could be like really like going back and understanding your guest avatar and thinking about like, hey, what are people looking for in my marketplace? Like maybe I need a hot tub, right? Or
Exactly.
maybe you can change the marketing, or you might have to change your offer. There's a mismatch between what needs your catering to with your listing versus what needs are desired in the marketplace.
Your ideal guest avatar actually might have changed between pre-COVID and now gradually, right? And so that's actually a very valid point that you're bringing up. And then the other thing that I'll say, and everyone says every listing is different, and it sounds like a generic phrase. So I'll kind of jump into this just a little bit. When you're booking at a hotel, you get one image of a room, and then they say, it's the king bed suite, and then they have 20 of those, right? So as far as booking is concerned, it's the exact identical product that people are booking. So they're identical. There's no difference. If there's a bad review for that hotel, they're all impacted the same way, right? So that's a apples to apples comparison. You and your neighbor are completely different units, even if you have the same layout, same, all that. And so that's where, we're saying like, it's not just that physically they're different and different ownership, but the way it's advertised, every listing is unique. And so that's why you have to look at kind of each unit as an individual, but then also take the overall market condition as a factor.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Awesome, dude. I appreciate you jumping on this podcast. It's been really interesting talking to you about this, and I really like your strategy that you're using. Let people know where they can find you and how you can help them.
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you search John on or TechTape on LinkedIn, you can definitely find me. I respond to everyone who messages me there. My website is gettechtape.com, gettechtape.com. And that's where, some of the explanation of the services that we provide are. And then if I could just, so I co-authored a chapter in a book. It's called the Book Direct Blueprint. And it's going to be published in December. So coming up right up in about 2 weeks or so. And I don't talk about revenue management, but I do talk about kind of the thesis around the tech stack within short-term rentals. And so, but then this book also has a lot of different authors like Price Labs and Mount and other co-authors. So anyway, you can also find me through that as well.
Awesome, dude. Well, thanks again for being on the show. I'm sure we'll have you back at some time. Hopefully I can come to Hawaii. I love Hawaii. I haven't been there in a long time. So yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks,
For,
Jasper, and
for sure.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. And thanks for everybody who's listening. Hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. Hope you can implement some of these some of this strategy that John shared. And if you do, let me know. Let me know if you see any results, if your revenue increases. And of course, Friday we'll be back with another episode. So have a great week and we'll see you soon.